Buddhāvataṃsaka Sutra. Book 39. Entry into the Realm of Reality. Video 41. Just as a clear jewel appears impure to a clouded eye, the inherently pure jewel of the aspiration to omniscience is perceived as impure by those whose eye of unbelief is beclouded by ignorance. Just as a body of medicine endowed with all medical knowledge and medicinal herbs cures the diseases of sentient beings by sight, contact, and association, in the same way the body of vows and knowledge of enlightening beings, sustained by the knowledge and medicine of wisdom and means assembling all roots of goodness, endowed with the will for enlightenment, cures sentient beings' diseases of afflictions by hearing, seeing, association, recollection, and application. Just as a goose feather robe is not stained by any dirt, the goose feather robe of the aspiration for enlightenment is not stained by the dirt of afflictions of the mundane world. Just as a wooden figure held together by the main pin does not fall apart and can perform any kind of movement, in the same way the body of the vow and knowledge of omniscience, held together by the main pin of the vow of enlightenment, can perform the tasks of enlightening beings, and does not fall apart as the embodiment of the vow of omniscience. Just as a machine without its pins cannot work, even though the parts are the same, similarly, the enlightening being without the commanding will of the aspiration to omniscience cannot attain Buddhahood, even though the preparations of the parts of enlightenment be the same. Just as a sovereign ruler has a precious incense by the perfume of which his 4 armies are levitated into the air, in the same way the roots of goodness of an enlightening being, perfumed by the incense of the determination for omniscience, leave the mundane and end up in the unconditioned realm of the sky of enlightened knowledge. Just as diamond comes from nowhere else but a jewel mine, from a diamond or gold mine, in the same way the diamond-like aspiration for omniscience comes from nowhere else but the jewel mine of roots of goodness in sentient beings' minds, from the diamond mine of universal compassion saving all beings, or from the gold mine of concentration on omniscience. Just as there is a kind of tree called rootless, whose roots cannot be found, yet branches, leaves, and flowers appear luxuriantly on the tree, in the same way the root of the aspiration for omniscience cannot be found, yet it appears in all worlds, blooming with all virtues, knowledge, and mystic capacities, forming a web of vows. Just as a diamond does not shine beautifully in another kind of vessel, and cannot be held in an imperfect, perforated vessel, only in a perfect vessel, in the same way the diamond of the aspiration for omniscience does not shine in the vessels of people with inferior resolutions, in the envious, in the immoral, in the mentally corrupt, in the lazy, in the heedless, or in the stupid, and it cannot be held by a vessel of a wavering, inconstant mind with defective will, only in the precious vessel of the powerful will of an enlightening being. Just as diamond pierces all jewels, the diamond of the determination for omniscience pierces the jewels of all truth. Just as adamant splits all mountains, the adamant of the aspiration for omniscience splits the mountains of all views. Just as even a cracked diamond is better than an ornament of gold, the finest of precious metals, in the same way the diamond of the aspiration for omniscience is better than the gold ornaments of the virtues of hearers and individual illuminates, even if the will is broken by adversity. Just as a diamond, even if cracked, relieves poverty, in the same way the diamond of the determination for omniscience, even if split, relieves the poverty of the mundane world. Just as a diamond, however little, breaks all gems and stones, in the same way the diamond of the aspiration for omniscience, focused on however small an object, breaks all ignorance. Just as a diamond does not come into the hands of an ordinary man, the diamond of the determination for omniscience does not come into the hands of those of low intentions and poor roots of goodness. Just as someone who has no knowledge of gems does not recognize the qualities of diamonds or understand their excellence, in the same way a stupid person does not know the qualities of the diamond of wisdom of the aspiration for enlightenment and does not understand its excellence. Just as a diamond cannot be worn out, the diamond of the aspiration for enlightenment, the basis of omniscience, cannot be worn out. Just as the thunderbolt weapon cannot be held even by a strong man unless he has superhuman strength, likewise the thunderbolt of the aspiration for enlightenment cannot be held even by the mighty saints and sages, only by the great enlightening beings with great illumination, excelling in the superhuman might of infinite roots of goodness based on the power of the cause of omniscience. Just as a thunderbolt can prevail where all other weapons cannot, and will not be destroyed, in the same way where the weapons of vows and knowledge of all Buddhist disciples and self-enlightened ones cannot prevail, in developing and guiding people or living through the toils of practice through the ages of past, present, and future, there the enlightening being who holds the great thunderbolt weapon of the determination for omniscience, indefatigable, prevails unharmed. Just as adamant cannot be held on any spot on the earth except on an adamantine surface, in the same way the adamant vows of emancipation of enlightening beings cannot be held by those whose goal is personal salvation only. It can only be supported by the adamantine ground of the resolute determination for universal enlightenment. Just as the ocean does not leak any water, because it is a solid container with an unyielding ground, in the same way the roots of goodness of an enlightening being, grounded on adamant, solid, unyielding dedication to enlightening, do not die out in any states of existence. Just as earth set on an adamantine base does not collapse or sink, in the same way the vows of enlightening beings, grounded on the adamantine base of the determination for enlightenment, are not rent apart and do not collapse in any mundane realm. Just as a diamond does not rot in water, the diamond of the aspiration for enlightenment does not decompose or soften even though it remains in the water of action and affliction for all ages. Just as a diamond is not burnt or heated by fire, the diamond of the determination for omniscience is not burnt by the fires of suffering of the mundane world and is not heated up by the fires of afflictions. Just as the seat of Buddha is sitting on the site of enlightenment battling the devil and awakening to omniscience cannot be supported by any spot on earth except the earth's surface of the adamantine center of the universe, in the same way the great force of power of the roots of goodness of enlightening beings aspiring to perfect enlightenment, carrying out the practice, fulfilling the transcendent ways, entering into tolerance, attaining spiritual station, dedicating roots of goodness, receiving assurance of Buddhahood, providing the necessities for the path of enlightening beings, and holding the multitudes of teachings of all Buddhas cannot be sustained by mind other than the mind set on omniscience, the adamantine core of all vows and knowledge. The aspiration for omniscience has these and untold other extraordinary virtues. And those who have set their minds on supreme perfect enlightenment are, have been, and will be endowed with such virtues. Therefore you have made a great gain in having aspired to supreme perfect enlightenment and seeking the practice of enlightening beings, because of attainment of these virtues. Also, you ask how an enlightening being is to learn and carry out the practice of enlightening beings. Go into this great tower containing the adornments of Vairocana and look. Then you will know how to learn the practice of enlightening beings, and what kind of virtues are perfected in those who learn this. Then Sadhana respectfully circumambulated the enlightening being Maitreya and said, "Please open the door of the tower, and I will enter." Then Maitreya went up to the door of the tower containing the adornments of Vairocana, and with his right hand snapped his fingers. The door of the tower opened, and Maitreya bade Sadhana to enter. Then Sadhana, in greatest wonder, went into the tower. As soon as he had entered, the door shut. He saw the tower immensely vast and wide, hundreds of thousands of leagues wide, as measureless as the sky, as vast as all of space, adorned with countless attributes. Countless canopies, banners, pennants, jewels, garlands of pearls and gems, moons and half-moons, multicolored streamers, jewel nets, gold nets, strings of jewels, jewels on golden threads, sweetly ringing bells and nets of chimes, flowers showering, celestial garlands and streamers, censers giving off fragrant fumes, showers of gold dust, networks of upper chambers, round windows, arches, turrets, mirrors, jewel figurines of women, jewel chips, pillars, clouds of precious cloths, jewel trees, jewel railings, jeweled pathways, jeweled awnings, various arrays of the floor, chambers of jewels, jeweled promenades, rows of golden banana trees, statues made of all kinds of jewels, images of enlightening beings, singing birds, jewel lotuses, lotus ponds, jewel stairways, ground of masses of various jewels, radiant gems, arrays of all kinds of jewels. Also, inside the great tower he saw hundreds of thousands of other towers similarly arrayed. He saw those towers as infinitely vast as space, evenly arrayed in all directions, yet these towers were not mixed up with one another, being each mutually distinct, while appearing reflected in each and every object of all the other towers. Then Sadhana, seeing this miraculous manifestation of the inconceivable realm of the great tower containing the adornments of Vairocana, was flooded with joy and bliss. His mind was cleared of all conceptions and freed from all obstructions. Stripped of all delusion, he became clairvoyant without distortion, and could hear all sounds with unimpeded mindfulness. He was freed from all scattering of attention, and his intellect followed the unobstructed eye of liberation. With physical tranquility, seeing all objects without hindrance, by the power of production everywhere he bowed in all directions with his whole body. The moment he bowed, by the power of Maitreya, Sadhana perceived himself in all of those towers. And in all those towers he saw various diverse inconceivable miraculous scenes. In one tower he saw where the enlightening being Maitreya first aspired to supreme perfect enlightenment, what his family was, what his basic goodness was, how he was inspired, how he was encouraged by spiritual friends, how long he lived, what age he lived in, what Buddha he met, what land he adorned, what assembly he was in, and what kind of special vows he undertook. He also perceived the length of life of the beings and the Buddha of that time, and saw himself in the presence of that Buddha, and saw all of his works. In one tower he saw where Maitreya first attained absorption in love, whence came his name, the Loving One. In another he saw where he carried out spiritual practice. In another, where he fulfilled the transcendent ways. In another, where he attained acceptance of things as unoriginated. In another, where he was assured of supreme perfect enlightenment, how he was assured, by whom, and how long it was predicted it would be before he was enlightened. In one tower he saw Maitreya as a sovereign king directing people to virtuous action. In another he saw Maitreya as a world guardian bestowing well-being and happiness on the world. In another he saw Maitreya as Indra, fostering detachment in those obsessed with pleasure. In another he saw Maitreya as Brahma, describing to people the measureless pleasure of meditation. In another he saw Maitreya as the chief of the gods of timely portion, describing to people the virtues of attentiveness and diligence. In another he saw Maitreya as the chief of the heaven of contentment, revealing the virtues of enlightening beings bound to become Buddhas in one lifetime. In another he saw Maitreya as a king of the heaven of good emanations, showing a company of celestials the array of emanations of all enlightening beings. In another he saw Maitreya as a lord of the heaven of control, explaining to the gods control over all phenomena. In another he saw Maitreya causing the devil to act, showing the gods the impermanence of all states of being. In another he saw Maitreya born in the palace of Titans, teaching the Titans truth so that they might do away with all conceit, pride, and arrogance, plunge into the ocean of knowledge, enter the ocean of spiritual knowledge, and attain the magic of knowledge of truth. In one tower he saw the underworld and saw Maitreya illumine the great hells with light and relieve the hellish pains of the beings in hell. In another tower he saw the ghost world and saw Maitreya giving much food and drink to the ghosts, relieving their hunger and thirst. In another tower he saw Maitreya guiding the beings in the animal realm. In one tower he saw Maitreya expounding the teaching to world guardians in an assembly of celestial kings. In another he saw him in a group of chief gods of the 33-fold heavens. In another he saw him in a group of chiefs of the heaven of timely portion. In another he saw him in a group of lords of the heaven of contentment. In another he saw him in a group of chiefs of the heaven of good emanations. In another he saw him in a group of kings of the heaven of control. In another tower he saw Maitreya as a great Brahma in a group of Brahma lords, expounding the teaching. In one tower he saw Maitreya in a group of dragons and serpents. In another, in a group of goblins and fiends. In another, in a group of titans and demons. In another, in a group of giant serpents. In another, in a group of human chiefs. In another tower, he saw the enlightening being Maitreya in a group of gods, dragons, goblins, fiends, cherubs, titans, birds, minotaurs, serpents, humans, and non-humans, expounding the teaching to them. In one tower he saw Maitreya in a group of hearers. In another, in a group of individual illuminates. In another, in a group of enlightening beings. In another tower, he saw Maitreya expounding the teaching to beginning enlightening beings who had just set their minds on enlightenment. In another tower he saw Maitreya extolling the excellences of the stages to those who had undertaken practice. In another, to those who had attained tolerance and were irreversible. In another, to those bound to be enlightened in one lifetime who had attained coronation. In another tower, to enlightening beings in the first stage. In another tower he saw Maitreya with enlightening beings in stages up to the 10th, extolling the excellence of all the stages. In another tower he saw Maitreya speaking of the infinity of fulfillment of the transcendent ways. In another, of impartiality in approaching and entering into all studies. In another, of breadth of entry into concentration. In another, of depth of liberation. In another, of pervasion of the realm of higher knowledge of quiescent meditation, concentration, and trance. In another, of entry into the methods of guidance in enlightening practice. In another, of breadth of performance of vows. In another tower he saw Maitreya with a group of enlightening beings engaged in the same practice as he, speaking of the relevance of providing for the welfare and happiness of all beings, of the various arts and sciences to be employed for the benefit of the world. In another tower he saw Maitreya with a group of enlightening beings bound to be enlightened in one life, telling them about coronation with the knowledge of all Buddhas. In another tower he saw Maitreya perambulating ceaselessly for hundreds of thousands of years. In another, he saw him engaged in recitation. In another, engaged in contemplation of doctrine. In another, engaged in exposition of doctrine. In another, engaged in writing down the teaching. In another, absorbed in concentration on universal love. In another, absorbed in all the meditations and immeasurables. In another, absorbed in the points of totality and the liberations. In another tower he saw Maitreya absorbed in the practice of bringing forth the higher knowledge of enlightening beings. In one tower he saw enlightening beings absorbed in an enlightening concentration which emanated phantoms, and saw multitudes of all kinds of emanations coming from every pore of their bodies. From the pores of some he saw multitudes of celestial hosts emerging. From some he saw multitudes of dragons, goblins, cherubs, titans, birds, minotaurs, serpents, Indras, Brahmas, world guardians, and emperors. From some he saw multitudes of princes. From some he saw multitudes of grandees, ministers, and gentlemen. From some he saw multitudes of hearers, individual illuminates, and enlightening beings. From some he saw multitudes of Buddha bodies. From the pores of some he saw measureless multitudes of phantoms of all sentient beings emerge. He heard various aspects of the teaching being broadcast from the pores of some of the enlightening beings, teachings of the virtues of enlightening beings, transcendent generosity, discipline, tolerance, vigor, meditation, wisdom, methods, vows, power, knowledge, the means of integration, the immeasurables, concentrations, trance, super-knowledge, mystic spells, intellectual powers of analysis and exposition, tranquility and observation, means of liberation, interdependent origination, the reliances, summarization of teachings, the points of mindfulness, the right efforts, the bases of mystic powers, the religious faculties and powers, the limbs of enlightenment, the paths, explanation of the vehicle of hearers, explanation of the vehicle of individual illuminates, explanation of the great vehicle, the stages, tolerances, practices, and vows. In this way he heard voices expressing all the ways into the teaching being broadcast. In another tower he saw gatherings of the audiences of Buddhas as well as the various differences among those Buddhas, their different families, the infinite variety of their physical adornments, the variety of their lifespans, the differences in their lands and eras, the variety of their teachings, the variety of the outwardness of their projected manifestations, the differences in the duration of their true teachings, and all the differences in their assemblies. In the middle of the great tower containing the adornments of Vairocana he saw one tower which was bigger than all the others and arrayed with adornments surpassing all the other towers. In that tower he saw a billion-world universe, in which he saw 100 million sets of 4 continents, with 100 million Jambudvipas and 100 million heavens of contentment. In those Jambudvipa continents he saw the enlightening being Maitreya being born in a lotus calyx. He also saw Maitreya taking 7 steps as Indra and Brahma watched, looking over the 10 directions, making the lion roar, showing all the stages of childhood, in the palace, out in the garden, setting out for omniscience, appearing to undertake ascetic practice, finally eating food, going to the site of enlightenment, conquering the devil, awakening to enlightenment, steadily gazing on the tree of enlightenment, being asked by Brahma to teach, and turning the wheel of the teaching, going into the celestial abodes, with various different manifestations of enlightening teaching, using various names of eras in different ways, with various different spans of life, various different arrays of gatherings, with various demonstrations of ways of purification of lands, carrying out various practices and vows, with various structures of teaching used as means to develop and mature all concerned, showing various distributions of relics and bases of maintaining the teachings. And everywhere there Sadhana perceived himself at Maitreya's feet. In all those assemblies, in all the manifestations of works, in the varieties of spans of life, by means of the knowledge based on clear recollection, standing on the ground of knowledge, sure to reach omniscience, Sadhana heard, from all the objects in all those towers, the nets of bells and chimes, the drums and songs, and so on, and from the beings therein, the thunder of inconceivable multitudes of voices. From some he heard of the variety of aspirations for enlightenment. From some, about the variety of offerings to Buddhas. From some, about the variety of arrays of Buddha lands. From some, about the infinite variety of teachings of Buddhas. Thus he heard the voices of all the teachings as they had been expounded in the past. He also heard about setting out for omniscience. In such and such a land the enlightening being so and so aspired to enlightenment, heard such and such a teaching, was inspired by the spiritual benefactor so and so, went to such and such a congregation at the foot of the Buddha so and so in such and such a land in such and such an age, planted such and such roots of goodness, heard about such and such qualities of Buddhahood, undertook such and such a variety of vows with such and such an intention, will realize supreme perfect enlightenment in so many eons after having carried out practice for so many eons, will be named so and so, will live so long, in a Buddha land with such and such qualities, with such and such higher commitments, such and such guidance of beings, such and such a congregation of disciples, individual illuminates, and enlightening beings, the true teaching to last for so many ages after the death of the Buddha, with such and such benefits. He heard another voice saying that in such and such a world the enlightening being so and so makes so many hundreds of difficult sacrifices in the practice of transcendent giving. The enlightening being so and so keeps the precepts, cultivates tolerance, acquires vigor, attains meditations, engages in the investigation of wisdom. The enlightening being so and so, in search of truth, relinquishes kingship, wealth, family, hands and feet, eyes and head, and practices self-mortification by fire. The enlightening being so and so, advanced in the teaching of those who arrive at thusness, works as a spiritual preacher, giving the gift of religion, performs the service of religion, raises the banner of religion, beats the drum and blows the horn of religion, showers the rain of religion, preserves the teaching of the enlightened, adorns monuments to the enlightened, has images of Buddhas made, comforts beings, and guards the treasury of truth. He heard another voice say that the Buddha so and so now is in such and such a world, currently existing and expounding the teaching, with such and such an initiation, in such and such an assembly in such and such a land in such and such an age, with such and such a lifespan, with such and such a doctrine guiding people in such and such a way, realizing such and such vows. In this manner, from each object Sadhana heard articulations of an infinite variety of aspects of the teaching, and by listening to all those voices he heard those facets of the teaching with a mind flooded with joy. From some he got facets of mental command. From others, facets of commitment, tolerance, conduct, transcendence, higher perceptions, mystic knowledge, liberation, and concentration. He also saw measureless arrays of reflections in the mirrors, reflections of assemblies of Buddhas, circles of enlightening beings, congregations of disciples, groups of self-illuminates, defiled lands, pure lands, defiled and pure lands, reflections of all Buddhas in one world, worlds with Buddhas, small worlds, large worlds, subtle worlds, gross worlds, worlds in the cosmic net of Indra, inverted worlds, level worlds, worlds of hells, animals, and ghosts, worlds full of celestials and humans. He also saw countless enlightening beings on the promenades or sitting on their seats, engaged in various activities. Some were walking around, some were doing spiritual exercises, some were practicing observation, some were projecting universal compassion, some were working on various sciences having to do with the welfare of the world, some were instructing, some were reciting, some were writing, some were asking questions, some were engaged in ripening conduct, concentration, and knowledge, some were undertaking vows. He saw webs of jewel lights coming from the pillars, some sapphire, some topaz, some ruby, some white, some crystal, some golden, some emerald, some diamond, some rainbow, some the colors of all lights, delightful to the body and mind, supremely pleasant to the eye. Continue to video 42.